little bit because it's flooding out the top of the, see if that makes a difference.
No, don't kill them
They
all.
still need some light to.
We won't be able to see.
All right, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. That's this. You can't do these? Oh, hold on, let me see. Let me see if this.
Yeah, it's inside of this. One of them is.
Okay. Give us 1 second, please.
I know.
No.
You can't get that? You
No,
can't get that?
we want just those out. See, that's dimming. That's cool.
Is it dimming it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Went too far.
That's good.
what about the darkness?
That was done before.
I know, but I need to be able to see.
Yeah.
Black is cool. Well, we'll work with this. We'll work with this. This is fine. All right, this is fine. So, this term metamorphosis was a term that was created by a sister who traveled to Kemet with me 10 years ago. And it speaks to the fact that when you travel to the Nile, when you travel to Kemet, it is a life-transforming experience. So metamorphosis was her way of describing how dramatically changed her life was as a result of a trip down the Nile. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes which speak to the significance of information that has come out of the Nile Valley. This is a quote from Costa. "There's no such thing as the past, present, or future, but they are all three simultaneously." That's from Costa, who was the grandfather of Pianki and Shabaka, the kings who established the 25th dynasty in Kemet. So understand this concept. There's no such thing. We're talking 800 BC.
That's what they call quantum physics now.
Well, that's what they call, right?
That's what I said they, yeah.
Right? There is no such thing as past, present, or future. They all exist simultaneously. So there's this timelessness, right, that Africans have always talked about. Amos Wilson, in one of his best lectures, said that an act does not end at the point of its occurrence, but it continues to reverberate into the future down through the ages, affecting generation after generation after generation. In other words, to sum up what Donny Hathaway said, everything is everything. It is. It is. And what we're talking about is understanding a people who were able to tap into the is of life, eternity of life. And they use that knowledge in order to create a civilization that has continued to influence mankind for thousands and thousands of years. That's what we're talking about when we talk about Nile Valley civilization. Nile Valley civilization is within the Nile Valley, which begins in South Central Africa with the beginning of the White Nile, and then the Blue Nile comes out of Ethiopia. This is all part of the Nile Valley. And Dr. John Henry Clark frequently talked about the fact that the Nile River represents a cultural highway, and that people followed the flow of water. This is the highland of Africa in the south. Water follows the flow of gravity and flows from the south to the north and empties out into the Mediterranean Sea. So people then navigated the natural flow of water. So the civilization, water, people flowed from inner Africa down north. Down north. And as a result, the culture and civilization followed this cultural highway and reached this highest point in the northernmost part of the Nile Valley, in the area that we now call Kemet. Here's a comparison of the Nile River Valley to the United States of America. Give you an idea of the length of this ancient culture and civilization. This is the oldest documented civilization on the planet. It began in Africa by indigenous African people. And that's the point that we really want to build on. It flowered in this region of northern Africa. Kush, lower and upper Kush, and upper and lower Kemet. That is where culture and civilization began. We know now, as a result of some of the latest research, that it's in this region where the essence of Kemet had its foundation. This is what we know now. As we do continued research, we probably will find that the essence began further up south. But as of this moment, this is what we know. We know, for example, that at this area here, Nabta Playa, they found the oldest astroarchaeological calendar in existence. It is an astroarchaeological calendar that was dated back to 6,270 BCE, older than Stonehenge. This calendar here was found right in this region. It was oriented to the solstices and the equinoxes at this specific geographic location, which means that as late as 6,270 BC, these Africans had already had a concept of time and the calendar. They knew that the earth was round and that the calendar year was 365 and a quarter days. This is a discovery that has just recently come into our knowledge. And then there's another location in this same general area here at Cusco, where in the 1960s, a team of archaeologists found this incense burner that was in a cemetery near Cusco, a royal cemetery. Now what's interesting is that this archaeological team from the University of Chicago was digging there in the 1960s because the Egyptian government was preparing to build the Aswan High Dam, which was going to create what was at that time the largest man-made lake in the world. And it meant that this dam would extend from Aswan all the way down to this region here, approximately 150 miles, and flood everything in this region. Flooded under 50 feet of water. There are temples, tombs, and monuments that were going to be destroyed as a result of the completion of this dam. So UNESCO issued a call to help save these monuments. One of the monuments that they saved was Abu Simbel, which was literally cut apart into hundreds of pieces, moved up 50 feet, moved back 150 feet, and then reassembled in a man-made concrete mountain. That was an engineering feat of unknown magnitude before it happened. Incredible. They moved other temples. The Egyptian government literally gave temples to various countries that paid for this project. You all got 2 temples in the Metropolitan Museum that came from this region. And this is in Nubia. This is Upper Kemet, Nubia. And there were untold monuments, cities, temples, and graves that were destroyed. I remember seeing an old video clip of Dr. Ben in the early 60s protesting by himself in front of the United Nations, protesting the building of this dam because it was displacing thousands of Nubians. And there were groups of Nubians who refused to leave. And approximately 3,000 of them drowned when the dam was built. And nobody cared. Nobody cared. So this team from the University of Chicago knew how important this area was, and they concentrated their efforts on excavations before the floodwaters came. And they found this artifact, this incense burner. Here's a drawing of all of the sides of the incense burner. And what this shows is this came from a royal tomb in Cusco, at least 200 to 300 years before the formal founding of Kemet. And what they found on this incense burner in Nubia, or Kush, what they found was a symbol of a drawing of a king wearing the crown of Upper Kemet with the false beard, symbol of the falcon, symbol of royalty, a palace facade, and examples of Meta Nature. So what this means is that the beginning of Kemetic culture and civilization began up south. was established by indigenous Africans who we call today Nubians. So if this is Heru, the falcon, then it means that the story of Asar and Set is already in place. And it came from up south. What's interesting is that Keith Seal, the archaeologist who made the discovery, kept it under wraps for almost a decade. And when he died in a car accident, one of his assistants, Bruce Williams, then published this information. So if it wasn't for Bruce Williams, we wouldn't know about this. And the issue that I'm constantly asking myself is, how much more information do we not know about because it's hidden in private libraries and museums? Now, this is what we know about Kemet. Kemet is the oldest documented civilization on the planet. The oldest documented civilization. Kemet was a nation of many firsts. The people of Kemet, according to the documentation that we have now, were responsible for giving us a 24-hour day. Were responsible for creating a calendar of 365 and a quarter days. They gave us an alphabet, Medu Neter. The first people to give us a writing system. They also were the first people to create books and libraries to house those books. They established theological and spiritual systems, which were the foundations for the three primary spiritual systems of the Western world. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all had their beginnings in the Nile Valley. Foreigners came into Kemet, were introduced to these religious traditions, and then went back home and reinterpreted them through their own cultural lens and presented them to their people as their primary path to salvation. That is a historical and documented fact. Kemet also was the first government that we know of. I'm, again, speaking of documented facts. The first government that we know of, ruled by a king, a monarch, who and his nation was administered by civil servants, the first civil servants in history. These civil servants oversaw massive civil works projects, the construction of cities, the construction of dams, great hydro engineering projects, civil engineering projects. They built the temples, the monuments, the tombs, and the pyramids. All of this was done by teams of skilled men and women. And as a consequence of all of this construction, it gave rise to the first middle class in human history. And this middle class was comprised of architects and engineers, designers, artists, healers, astronomers, scientists, priests, merchants, philosophers, warriors. This is the reason why Kemet, the civilization of Kemet, lasted so long. Because they had this base, they had this foundation, and they were continually fed by people from the south, their ancestors from the south. So there was this continuous flow of knowledge and information and spiritual power. We can view Kemet, we should view Kemet as the granddaughter of Ethiopia, Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania. That's what it is. And we should see this relationship between Kemet in the north and their grandparents in the south as similar to the relationship between us and our grandparents or great-grandparents who came from the south, who participated in this great migration from the south to the north looking for better opportunities. They made a life up north, in New York, in Chicago, in Philadelphia, in Boston, in Detroit. But they always sent their kids back home to the south every summer, all right, to give you that foundation so that you didn't lose that spirit. And whenever there was trouble in the family, you could always go back home, all right? And what we find in Kemet was this same relationship. Whenever there was trouble up north, they could always depend on assistance in the south. Always. That's the relationship. And that's the context in which we should view Kemet. We should view this civilization. So understand Cush and how Cush grew to become Kemet. And they never had a separation. There was always a continuous flow of knowledge and information and exchange of people and culture. What I want to build on, what I want to introduce to you is a construct that was given to us by Dr. Asa Hilliard, in which he gives us a baseline chronology of Kemetic culture and civilization. He divides Kemetic culture and civilization into 4 golden ages. And understanding these golden ages is critical to us understanding the development of culture and civilization in the Nile River Valley. You had dynasties 3 through 6 were responsible for giving us the first golden age. These rulers built the pyramids in Giza, Saqqara, Dashur, Media. All of the pyramids were built in this region by a series of rulers, specifically fathers who established the process, and then their sons and grandsons followed their example. We see this pattern repeated over and over and over again. This period lasted, the first golden age lasted approximately 555 years. And then there was this period of internal disorder, the first intermediate period. As we understand Kemet, we've got to understand that there wasn't peace and happiness and harmony all throughout Kemet. That's a fallacy. These were human beings, like all human beings. They have problems, they have issues, they have wars, they have conflicts. They resolve the conflicts. They learn from their mistakes and they move on. That's reality. So we need to move away from this idealistic concept that Ma'at and peace and happiness was everywhere. That's not true. It doesn't diminish who they were and what they did. It just puts them into a proper perspective. So these periods of internal disorder, when you read the text, and the texts are there, they read like the Sunday morning edition of the New York Post or the Washington Post. No. In terms of who shot who beat up who stole from who. You read you read the accounts of what was happening during these periods of internal disorder, and you swear you're reading today's newspaper. There's confusion everywhere. There's nobody to trust. Sons are disobeying their fathers. It's contemporary news that happened thousands of years ago. That's real. And then these periods of internal disorder were brought under control in every instance by Africans from the South who came and ushered in a new golden age. Every time Kemet got in trouble, it was always Africans from the South who set things right. So the second golden age, dynasties 11 and 12, was a time frame in which all of the great literature of Kemet was written. The wisdom texts, legal documents, incredible stories about life, metaphors about life. All of this comes out of this great period. Why did they write these stories? Because they had just gone through some very difficult times. And they had lessons, many lessons to reflect on. To leave examples for those who came behind them. Don't make the same mistakes our ancestors had made before us. That second golden age lasted for 256 years. And it, unfortunately, was followed by a second intermediate period. And during this second intermediate period, represented the first time in the history of Kemet where Kemet was invaded by foreigners, the Hyksos, so-called shepherd kings, Asiatics from the northeast who came in and conquered Kemet. They only conquered the northern part of Kemet. Every time these foreigners came in, every time these foreign armies came in, they only controlled the northern part of Kemet, lower Kemet. Not upper Kemet, not the heart and soul, because it was that part of the country that was closest to Europe, closest to Asia. So they had access to it. And you have to accept the fact that the only reason, or one of the primary reasons, why these foreigners were able to come in and take control of our communities was because we messed up. We didn't have our stuff together. Because when we did have our stuff together, they didn't dare enter our country. The second intermediate period was followed by, again, kings, rulers from the south, who established the third golden age, which lasted 364 years, dynasties 18 and 19. It was this era in the history of Kemet where all of the great temples were built. Luxor Temple, Karnak Temple, Abydos. All of these great temples were built during this time frame, and for the first part in the history of Kemet, they were forced to become an imperialistic nation. They were forced to send their military outside of their borders to build forts in the north to prevent these invaders from coming back in and taking control of their nation. So it represented a profound shift in the thinking of the people, because now they were in some efforts, they were not unlike the U.S. in that they were forced to become a military power in order to protect their interests. They had never had to do that before. And what you also will notice here is that the periods of the Golden Age, with the exception of the third Golden Age, the period of the Golden Ages get shorter and shorter as the periods of, as the intermediate periods and periods of confusion get longer and longer. So what you are seeing is the gradual diminution of the power of Kemet. Kemet is dying, slowly dying. And as she dies, she becomes more vulnerable, more susceptible to outside influences. We have the third intermediate period at the end of the third Golden Age. During that third intermediate period, Kemet was controlled by various so-called warlords in the nation who all vying for power, controlled by Libyans from the west, Asiatics in the north. There was total turmoil. And then Kashta, who was up south in Kush, said that I've got to clean house again and restore the land of my ancestors. And Kashta set in motion the fourth Golden Age, but died before he could complete his mission. Right? And the fourth Golden Age lasted approximately 130 years. After the fourth Golden Age ended, Kemet was, for all intents and purposes, after the fourth Golden Age ended, the 25th dynasty, Kemet was never again completely controlled by African people. Persians came in, then the Greeks came in, then the Romans came in, and then ultimately the Arabs came in, and they've had possession of Kemet ever since. So everybody who came into Kemet took a piece of what had been established during these other golden ages, and they used this piece to advance their civilization, their culture. That's how this process went on. That's how Kemet influenced Western culture and civilization. So let's look at this in context. During the period of the 18th dynasty, Jehoiakim III, Tutmosis III, in an effort to consolidate his base, I think it was J.E. Rogers who referred to Jehoiakim III as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, right? Because he had established a military base that had gone all the way into Asia, all the way into Palestine, a set of fortifications, as I mentioned last night in the presentation I did last night. If you go to Israel, if you go to Megiddo, at Megiddo, they would tell you that the first recorded battle in history took place at that site. That was the Battle of Jehoiakim III, when he ran out the Asiatics and set up fortifications within that region of the so-called Middle East, and left garrisons of troops there in order to prevent any invading army from making their way back into Kemet again. So the first recorded battle in history is a battle that was led by Jehoiakim III, the 18th dynasty. According to the book of Revelations, the very last battle on earth would take place at that same location. We also have an instance during the 18th dynasty, when Jehoiakim went into, during periods of difficulty, he went into Cush. He went into this region and built a temple to Amen in Cush. And when they built that temple, and this is where it gets kind of tricky, many European Egyptologists want to say that this was Egypt exerting its influence over Cush, over Nubia. But I interpret it as Egypt coming back home and paying homage to their parents. And then he built a temple in honor of Amen. And what we find within this culture, particularly here at Jebel Barco, there was a temple built to Amen, and they began to talk about the fact, or write about the fact that this was the birthplace of Amen. One of the most important Neteru in ancient Kemet was Amen. And they declared that he came from here. He came from Cush. So there was a well-established temple of Amen at the time of Kashta, during the third intermediate period. And Kashta said, it's time for me to clean up house, and marshaled his forces and took them back into Kemet and went to Waset, the capital of Kemet, where he bathed in the waters of the sacred lake of Amen in the temple of Karnak, and then instructed his soldiers to do the same as they prepared themselves for holy war. Unfortunately, Kashta died before he could complete the work, his job. But his son, Pianke, took up his father's work, came in, followed in his father's footsteps, marched his army to Waset, bathed in the sacred waters, asked for protection from Amen, said that this was a holy war, had his soldiers do the same thing, and then they went all the way down north and conquered all of Kemet. And then he came back home and said, my job is done. But it really wasn't. Because the enemies of Kemet were resilient. And they began to come back in and took control of northern Kemet again. By this time, Pianke had died, and his brother had come to the throne. His brother Shabaka said, all right, I'm going to learn from my brother's mistake, and I'm not going to let it happen again. This time he marshaled his forces. They came from up south, back into Kemet, stopped at Waset, bathed in the holy waters, asked for protection from Amun, and they went in and they wiped out everybody. They did a Kaiser Soze. They killed the soldiers, killed their horses, killed their wives, killed their children. They wiped them all out to send a message to all the Asiatics, this is home. Y'all are not welcome here. And then, once he secured the borders again, he set about the business of rebuilding the land of his ancestors. 25th dynasty is important because it represents the first Renaissance in history. 25th dynasty was all about rebuilding Kemet, and in their own words, specifically rebuilding the land of their ancestors. They not only drove out the foreigners, but they rebuilt the temples, the monuments. They rewrote the sacred texts of their ancestors. They engaged in an act of Sankofa. What else is interesting is that during this period, particularly during the period of the Third Golden Age, we see in several tombs Kemites drawing images of themselves and the Cushites. This is an image from the tomb of Seti I and 19th dynasty. And we see Seti I depicting the Cushites and the Kemites as basically people of color, not Europeans, as National Geographic would have us believe. Seti I's grandson, Ramesses III, in his tomb has this depiction of the Cushite and the Kemite. You can't tell which is which. They're acknowledging their ancestors. They are depicting their ancestors. So this is concrete evidence from primary sources of who the people of Cush, who the people of Kemet were. They're not separate races, as National Geographic or the Discovery Channel would have us believe. 25th dynasty came in, Pianke and, well, Kashta, Pianke, and Shabaka all waged wars of liberation. They drove out the foreigners. Once the foreigners were gone, then they established peace throughout all the land. That's their legacy. That's what the 25th dynasty is noted for. So then let's look at this gallery of ancestors, this gallery of African men. Kashta got the ball rolling. And one could say that Kashta was the first king of the 25th dynasty. He planted the seeds in the minds of his son. He didn't complete the job, but he deserves credit for getting the ball rolling. His son Pianke followed in his footsteps after he died. When Pianke died, his brother Shabaka followed in his footsteps and completed the job. When Shabaka died, the son of Pianke, Shabika, maintained control of his father's and his uncle's and his grandfather's kingdom. And when Shabika died, his brother Taharka took over. And when Taharka died, his cousin Tanudamen took over. So we're looking at 3 generations of African men following in the footsteps of their fathers. This is what we did when we were in control of our destiny. This is how black men led their families, their communities, and their nations. This is what we've got to return to. We've got it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've got all of the documentation. We've got the examples. All we have to do is be willing to engage in acts of Sankofa and replicate this model in our communities right now. And we have an opportunity to do that. I want us to be very fully aware of what time it is and where we are in the overall scheme of things. These are the tombs that were built in Kush. This is actually the tomb of Taharka. As Dr. Clark often said, there are more pyramids in Kush than there are in Kemet. There are approximately 225 pyramids in Kemet. And at last count, there was 118, 119 in Kemet. They keep finding pyramids in Kemet, or more specifically, they keep finding the ruins of pyramids in Kemet. So Dr. Clark often talked about the fact that this concept of pyramid building originated in the South and migrated northward down the Nile. We need to begin to do more research in the South so that we can validate this statement. There's still a lot of work to do. And this is Taharka. This is the cover of the National Geographic edition that came out about 2.5 years ago. I think it was Black History Month, 2007, 2008. It's a well-written article, but the article is deceptive. The article is very deceptive. The black pharaohs. They make the assertion that the only time there were black pharaohs or black rulers of Kemet was during the 25th dynasty. So the title is deceptive. It suggests that the other rulers of Kemet were not black. And that's a lie. That's a lie. All of the major periods of culture, civilization of Kemet were established by indigenous African people from the South. And we need to be able to understand that very clearly. We need to be able to tell that story, teach that story. This is 2010. And we're still being bombarded by lies. There's still people right now in New York who question whether or not King Tut was black. It's 18th dynasty. If you knew his lineage, you would know beyond a shadow of a doubt who he was and what he was. So the only reason others can get away with that nonsense is because we have not done our job. We've not done the work that Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and Chancellor Williams and others have prepared us to do. And that's inexcusable. We have to do better. We have to do better. So, what I want us to look at, and what I want us to understand, is that 6,252 years after the founding of Kemet, and 2,757 years after the 25th dynasty, this is what we know. This is what we are certain of. That when Kemet fell, the past was erased and the erasure was forgotten. This is what we know for sure. We know that ancient facts were falsified and presented as historical truths in order to separate Cush from Kemet, Kemet from Egypt, Egypt from Africa, and Africans from their own cultural legacy. This is 2010. And we still have to fight to prove that Africans were black? What kind of nonsense is that? We're the only people who have to prove the civilization, the culture and civilization that took place on our continent was done by us, and not Asiatics or Caucasians. The only reason why we're still fighting this fight is because we have not done our work. We have not used the resources that were available to us to end this issue once and for all. And we have to do better. We have to do better. So, what I want to do in talking about this history, one of the best ways to talk about the history sometimes is to...
Mr. Browder, may you please go back to the past line?
You want to continue writing?
Yes, just the last line.
Just the last line? There you go, my sister. There you go, my sister. Thank you for asking me so politely. And my point is that in talking about this history, and I'm just giving you a broad overview. For people who hear this information for the first time, it's overwhelming, it's confusing, because it conflicts with what we all have been taught in school. Whether you've gone to black school or a white school. I went to Howard. I didn't learn any of this stuff at Howard. And in certain HBCUs, you are still forbidden from teaching this information right now. Right now. All right? And in presenting this information to folk, there is this resistance because this is new information. Now, I understand in psychology of the human brain, anytime we're introduced to new information, we experience this phenomenon called scotoma. And that is, we automatically reject any new information that doesn't fit into our understanding of the past. Why? Because what we know makes us comfortable. You're comfortable with what you know. When someone presents new information to you, it makes you squirm. You feel uncomfortable. That's understandable on a psychological level. We naturally sometimes resist new information because it moves us outside of our comfort zone. That's a reality. So what I've learned over the years is that one of the ways we can minimize that resistance is to use humor. And one of the best humorists to help us in that effort is Richard Pryor. And what I want to share with you is this short clip that Richard Pryor did in 1977. Yep, 1977. Because what this does is to set the stage for what happened and for what I'm going to share with you next, what is happening right now. We have to be able to put this into context so that we know what we're dealing with, and more importantly, we know how we must deal with it. Right? So let me share this short Richard Pryor piece. And I want us to understand what Richard was doing in 1977. Richard Pryor was the most popular comedian of his day, black, white. And it was unprecedented for him to have this primetime show on NBC in 1977. And Richard said from the very beginning, I'm not going to shuck and jive. I'm going to use this program as an opportunity to not only entertain my people, but to educate my people. He only did 4 shows before NBC pulled the plug. 4 shows. So I want you to contrast what he was doing then with what we have now on television. Contrast this to all the nonsense that Tyler Perry is giving, Meet the Browns, and all of this foolishness. We're going back to this shucking and jiving period because that is what makes white folk comfortable. That is what they want you to internalize so that you no longer are a threat to them and their plans to take back their country. Yeah. You won't even be able to resist them taking back their country if you're still in Amos and Andy mode. And that's what has been continuously fed to us and fed to our psyche to minimize our ability to fight back and do the things that we are supposed to be doing as men and women at the end of the first decade of the better for those who have not even been born. And if you can't think and function on that level, you waste an air. You shouldn't even be here. Because times are serious. We don't have time to waste. We don't have time to play. This information is not nothing to play with. Too many people have lost their lives, have lost their careers, bringing us information that we're playing with. We need to stop tripping and start doing the work that needs to be done if we're going to resurrect the history and the culture of our ancestors. It does us no good to say we descended from kings and queens if you're living in the projects. That ain't helping you. It ain't helping you at all. What did they know that I can use right now to make my quality of life better? How can I apply that information in my children's school to increase their chances of success in this country? In this country. And I want us to understand very clearly that with all the wrong that the United States has done, this is still the best place to be living in the world right now. There's more chances of opportunity right here than any place else on the planet at this particular point in time in history. That's why people come here from all over the world. And they work hard. Within a matter of years, they're achieving things that we still, some of us still can't figure out how to deal with. It's time for us to get serious and stop faulting others for the things that we're too unwilling to do. I was going to say lazy, but unwilling to do. So this is the issue. This is the issue.
Brother, before you do more, you just made such a wonderful point with that. And you guys remember a call where I said that there was a broken foundation and divine specification. They don't get past generation to generation. You see, you just showed with a textbook that they opened up. Now you see, he's verifying what I was talking about. Yeah. These texts were in these tombs, and all these texts are gone now. They all disappeared. They're all gone. Where'd they go? Where'd all these texts go? He just showed you how he opened the text up, and really, that's really what happened.
Wow.
They just took the stuff out of the libraries, out of the temples, and they took it to Europe. When I showed that publication for the creation of Karnak Temple based upon the layout of St. Peter's Basilica based upon Karnak Temple, that stuff that they got in those
My brother, respect to you, you are your lecturer, please.
No.
I'm respecting it.
That's the point based upon what he just showed, to show you how what he's saying is so serious about what he's saying. What he's saying is the absolute truth.
Because the counterpart to what he's saying is, I've had this feeling all my times of traveling to Egypt, going into the temples, going into the tombs, examining what's there. Question rose in my head. You see these incredible temples, but there are no manuscripts, there are no documents that talk about how they were built. Who built? We have some sketchy information, but for people who wrote everything, they recorded everything they did. What is missing, this pantheon of literature, is how they built these structures. So my only conclusion is somebody's got that information. And they're sitting on it, they're trying to decipher it, and they're trying to use that to hold on to the power that is slowly slipping away from them. So this is where we are. This is the reality in which we're living right now. We don't have to dwell on the past. We don't have to be complaining about what happened in the past. we can use our understanding of the past in order to create the future that we want, because that future, as Kasha said, exists right now. It's already here. You have to open up your eyes and see that it's there and manifest it. It's already here. What we're doing right now is a project that I'm extremely excited about. And after 30 years of traveling to Kemet, traveling to the Nile Valley, I'm just now beginning to understand why I have been doing what I have done over the last 30 years. I'm just now beginning to understand. And it's partially due to my meeting this woman and the work that I'm involved in right now. In 2008, one of my best friends from Egypt, who I've been working with for 21 years, 2008, he finally convinced me to take a journey with him to the Western Desert. He had been saying he's been my guide on my trips to Egypt since 1988. He's in Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. His name is Abu Naga. He is like a brother to me. He is a family member to me. And we've had some phenomenal conversations. He's opened doors for me that other people have not had access to. He's shown me things that other people haven't seen. And he had been telling me for the longest time, Tony, you need to come and take this trip in the Western Desert. And I kept putting it down. I don't have the time. So finally, in July 2008, I said, all right, I'll do this. You know, I'll come early. I had a group coming later that year. So I said, listen, I'll come out 2 weeks earlier. I'll spend some time with you in the desert. We'll do this trip. And then he's got this house. He let me stay at this house so I can do some research on this new book that I'm working on, the follow-up to this. And it was during that trip that two phenomenal things happened. I went with him out in the Western Desert, a couple of 100 miles from the Nile River. And do you know that there are temples, there are tombs, there are monuments in the middle of this desert? There's stuff everywhere. I seen temples and monuments no folk that I know have ever seen. And on one particular occasion, we slept out under the stars. We camped out because we had a 4x4 and we had a tent, and we camped out under the stars in the middle of the desert. And that was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life. I woke up in the middle of the night and just saw, you know this expression, a blanket of stars in the sky? Yeah. I saw a blanket of stars in the sky. I saw the sky for the first time in my life. Y'all ain't seen the sky. Here in New York, in the United States, y'all ain't seen the sky. You see, something up there, but you don't see the sky. The real sky, when you're away from lights, you see every square inch of that blackness has a dot, a star, a planet. That's what's out there. And as I just kind of marveled in all of that, I could see the Milky Way. I mean, it's there. And in all the sacred texts of Kemet, they talk about the rivulet in the sky. They talk about the Milky Way. And I thought they were making it up, but it's there. I saw shooting stars. I mean, and realized that this is what they saw. I'm seeing the same sky they saw. I'm going back 6,000 years in time and seeing what they saw. I'm experiencing the same thing that they're experiencing. I mean, it was profound connection. In the middle of the desert, I mean, I saw things that you can imagine. We found this petrified forest in the desert. A petrified forest in the desert. I found shark's teeth in the desert. I found the calcified carcass of a whale in the middle of the desert. Huh? So do you all understand what this world was? What that region of Africa was? At the end of that trip, came back to his place and doing some research, and this brother took me to tombs that have not been open to the public. I'm taking pictures of I got thousands and thousands of photographs. Right? And I'm in the apartment one evening. I received a phone call from his nephew. My uncle called me and wanted me to come by and tell you about the work that I'm doing with this woman, Dr. Lena Piszczykova. She's discovered some tombs that I think you'd be interested in, and he wants you to meet her. Had a telephone conversation. The next day, I went over and met her. She lives right here in New York. She's born in Russia, came to the United States in 1990, received training in Egyptology at New York University from Bernard Bothmer, who was then the foremost expert in the 25th dynasty. And he trained her in the art and history of the 25th dynasty. So she is now one of the foremost experts on the 25th dynasty. She worked for the Metropolitan Museum, doing excavation and conservation work in numerous tombs on the west bank of Luxor. In her spare time, she was looking for some 25th dynasty tombs that were first recorded by some Englishmen in the late 19th century and were last written about by an Austrian Egyptologist / architect in the 1970s who saw these tombs, and then the tombs disappeared. So she knew the general area where the tombs were. And in her spare time, she was looking for these tombs. 2005, she found them. 25th dynasty tomb. Right? So she goes to her employer, Metropolitan Museum, and tells them of her discovery, seeking financial support for them. And they said, leave this alone. Walk away from it. But this is important. This is 25th dynasty. And from what I read of these tombs, this shows a connection between the 25th dynasty and Kush and ancient Egypt. And it shows that they're the same people. And this is a culture of Renaissance, how they helped to rebuild Kemet. And it goes all the way back to the Pyramid Age of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dynasty. There's this connection. There's this link that people need to know about. Leave this alone. These are not your people. Richard Pryor piece. They wanted to shut her down. And she said, this is history. People need to know this. And when they refused to support her work, this woman, this white woman, quit her job. And then used her own money to finance the excavation of the tomb. And when she ran out of money, she tapped into her 401k. And when she ran out of her 401k, she used her credit cards. And when she maxed out her credit cards, she started dipping into her daughter's college fund. So when I met her in July of 2008, she had run out of money. And she had still just kind of scratched the surface in her work and was panicking. She didn't know what she was going to do next because she had invested everything in this, and she was coming to an end. She had no place to turn. We talked about her work. She took me down in the tomb, and as soon as I saw what was there, I automatically understood the importance of that discovery. And I said, well, I know a few people. I can talk to some folk. We can get the word out. We can help raise some money so your work can continue. And that's when we, 2008, fall of 2008, began to put together this idea for this project that we named in honor of Dr. Hilliard. But this is the site. These are the 3 tombs. Originally, in 2005, when she discovered them, houses were built right over these tombs. This is the village of Kurna, in the west bank of Luxor. The Arabs who lived there, specifically the Rasul family, Abdullah el Rasul's family, he was a chief of the village, had his house built right over this tomb here. And what they would do is drill through the floor of their home until they found a tomb, and then they would use that tomb as their personal ATM. They would sell the contents of the tomb, the gold, the jewelry, the mummified remains. They would sell it on the white market to the European tourists who came in. That's how they financed their lifestyle. She had to go through a lot of finagling just to get them to acknowledge that their homes were built over these tombs and to get access to them. Once she found what was there and then brought news of this to Zahir Was, he said that this is an important site. I will give you permission to excavate. And 2009, he then, based on what was being uncovered, he then had bulldozers come in and destroy all of those homes. so she would have free access to the excavation. And then they relocated all of those folk to a new village that they built for her. So this is where she's doing her work. So this is the area. There's 3 tombs. 2 25th dynasty tombs. Tomb of Karabashkin. This is the only image of Karabashkin that we have. His tomb had been totally destroyed, decimated by the Rasul family. And the only image we have of him is his Shwapti figure. Karabashkin was the mayor of Waset. Waset is the capital of Kemet. 25th dynasty. We have been able to surmise that he was appointed mayor of Waset during the reign of either Pianke or Shabaka, the very beginning of the 25th dynasty. And this is his tomb. Second tomb is the tomb of Karakamun. These are fragments from his tomb. Karakamun was the first Ak priest at the temple of Karnak. Ak priest is the priest responsible for doing the morning libation, the Holy of Holies of that temple. 2 25th dynasty tombs, and the 26th dynasty tomb is the tomb of a sister by the name of Iteru. She was the chief attendant to the divine consort of the wife of Amun. In other words, she was the right-hand woman of the daughter of the king. And this is the only image of her that we have. It's her Ba figure that was found in her burial chamber that had already been robbed blind by the Rasul family. As a matter of fact, last summer, when they were excavating her burial chamber, they found a note written in Arabic on the wall that said, "Don't even bother looking here, it's already gone." Okay? So this is what we're dealing with. I went to Atlanta in August of 2008 and met with Dr. Hilliard's family. Told him of this project and asked their permission to name this project in honor of Dr. Asa Hilliard, who passed in Egypt August the 13th, 2007. So let me share with you what we've done over the past 2 years with the Asa Restoration Project. This tomb is in an area on the west bank of Luxor known as South Asasif. South Asasif is, for those of you who've been to Kemet, you've gone to the temple of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut's temple is in Asasif. This is south of Asasif, between Hatshepsut's temple and the Valley of the Queens. It's directly across the road from the Ramesseum, just to give you a point of reference. This is where Karakamun worked. Karnak Temple. Karnak Temple was and still is the largest temple complex in the world. Half-mile wide, 1.5 miles deep. You could take every church built in London, England, and put them inside of this temple and still have room for 2 football fields. It's incredible. This is the place where Kashta, Pianke, Shabaka, and all 3 of their sons came to bathe in the sacred waters to prepare for holy war, the first jihad, the first holy war in the history of humanity. They came to the temple of Amen. Y'all heard that word before, Amen. This is his holy temple. They prayed to him for divine protection as they waged war against the enemies of Kemet. And once they restored their land, then Pianke, Shabaka, Taharka, all of these men rebuilt or added to this temple, added to this complex. It was Shabaka who is responsible for expanding the lake and creating it to the size that we see today. When you go to Karnak Temple, it's an incredible structure. Incredible structure. It was Taharka who built 10 columns at the entrance to the Hyperstar Hall. These 10 columns, of which only one remains today, Taharka's column, these were the tallest columns in any temple in all of Egypt. This is the 25th dynasty. adding to the legacy of their ancestors, building for eternity. Taharka also built a chapel inside of this temple complex. They were a part of this culture, not apart from this culture. They were a part of this culture. This is where Karakamoon worked, and this is where he was buried. In the 1990s, there was a flood in Egypt, and the ceiling of his tomb collapsed. These tombs are under the ground. They're like 40 feet under the earth, carved out of the limestone bedrock. So the creation of these tombs is not architecture, it's sculpture. Because you're removing everything that you don't want to be a part of this space. Not building the space, you're removing. And then the space is there, is what's left. 40 feet under the earth. So when the ceiling collapsed of this tomb, then it created this indentation in the sand. So the Arab family at the village of Kerna, hey, it's a perfect spot to dump our garbage. So when Dr. Lena came there in 2005, she found this garbage dump. And then she hired these workers to remove all of this stinky, funky garbage. A decade of garbage. In the summer heat, 115, 120 degrees. So the workers weren't happy, but it was work. Right? And they began to remove all of this debris, and she began to find things. They removed the debris and began to enter into this tomb. At the end of the first season, this is what they found. The first pillared hall. In this corner right here, you can't see it very well because of the light, but there's a wall right here. Here's an enlargement of what is on this wall. And what we have here is a larger than life-size carving of Karakamoon sitting in a chair before an altar. What's important about this scene is that the clothing that he's wearing, the posture that he has, and the chair that he's sitting on are all elements that go all the way back to the old kingdom. So he is, this image of him is a replication. It's this image here is a replication of Sankofa. He went all the way back to the best part of their past and replicated that in the present moment so that he could continue to build for eternity. It's in this area right here. Now, this is where we're concentrating our efforts. By virtue of the fact that the ceiling collapsed, that prevented the Rasul family from occupying this tomb, because essentially that's what they did to the other tombs, the tomb of Rakamun and the tomb of Iteru. They lived inside of those tombs. Why? Because they're 40 feet under the earth. And if it's 110 degrees above the earth, it's 25, 30 degrees cooler inside of the tomb. So that was their summer home. They lived inside of the tomb of Iteru and Karabashki. They cooked inside of the tomb, so the ceiling was black with soot. They washed their clothes and strung up a clothesline by nailing it into the plastered wall with metal netcher and carvings, painted images, nailed it into the wall. So as their clothes were drying, the water was dripping off the clothes onto the floor, increasing the humidity in the room, causing the plaster on the walls to flake off such that there's nothing there now. They kept their animals, their goats and their sheep in the back part of the tomb, in the Holy of Holies of their tomb. So as Dr. Lena was excavating there, they had to excavate through 12 feet of animal feces. This tomb was spared because the ceiling collapsed. We're now in a position to go in and find all these incredible things. We're now in a position to reconstruct this tomb. This is what it looked like at the end of the first season in 2008. After they had completely excavated the first pillar hall, there are 8 pillars in the first pillar hall. Here's the pillars on the north side, and then there's 4 pillars on the south side. These pillars were originally 10 feet in height. But when the ceiling collapsed, the pillars crashed. But all of the images on the pillars are still there in the debris. We've got the fragments. So we have the potential now to reconstruct this entire tomb. That's the goal. This is what it looked like at the end of 2008, right? At the end of 2008. So here's the wrap to come down into the tomb. Here are the pillars in the first pillared hall, right here. Through the Acer Restoration Project, for the last 2,000 years, 2009, 2010, we financed the excavations at this tomb. We financed it, black folk. First time in history, African Americans have financed an excavation in Egypt and took mission members over to participate in an excavation. This is what it looked like in 2009 when we were there. This is what it looked like this summer. We completely excavated and excavation costs about $10,000 a month. We've got about 75 workers that have to be paid. We've got supervisors from the Egyptian government who have to be paid. We've got, we got supplies we got to pay for. We've got tools. We've got all this. All this stuff has got to be paid for by somebody. Metropolitan Museum said, no, we ain't paying for this because we don't want this information to come out to the general public. So this is what we're doing through the Acer Restoration Project. This season, 2010, once we cleared away the entire first pillared hall, our goal then was to begin the process of reconstructing the pillars. This project, and I have to acknowledge that we're working under the auspices of the Egyptian government. We're working under the auspices of Zahir Was. He's the one who's given Dr. Lena Pishikova the permit to do this work. And he said that what we have to do is do the conservation of this tomb, which means that we have to, our purpose for being there is to excavate so that we can conserve what we find and then rebuild the tomb. That's our mission. So once we excavated the first pillared hall, we then covered up the other pillars with mud bricks to protect them because we're going to be using this space to store the other artifacts that we were uncovering as we began to excavate this area here, which is the second pillared hall. And then the other thing that we're doing is reconstructing these pillars. Reconstructing the pillars. That's part of the process. So it's cost money for it. We got to pay for the mud. Well, actually, we didn't pay for the mud bricks because even mud bricks cost money. We didn't have the money in the budget to pay for mud bricks. So since the houses were torn down, we hired a couple of workers to go to where the houses were and find mud bricks that we could use to put around these pillars to protect them so they wouldn't be damaged as we were working in this space. We're on a tight budget. Right? This is where we were concentrating our efforts, on this pillar right here. And these are some of the conservators who are helping to, one, consolidate this pillar by injecting chemicals into it or putting cement into certain portions of it to reinforce it. And then they constructed this, fabricated these steel pieces to serve as a foundation, a base, so that the stonemason that we hired, who is cutting blocks of limestone to fit his specifications, would then place those stone blocks to put them on top of this pillar to reconstruct it to its original height of 10 feet. Wow. And we have to do that for each of the pillar in this hall. And it costs about maybe $10,000 in material and time to do all of this. It's a slow process. And you know, Egypt is very much a third world country. We don't have all this high-tech technology, so it's labor intensive. We had to build a winch to be able to lift up the blocks of limestone to put them in place to secure them on this pillar. Here is the column at the mid part of July. And then here it is at the end of August, restored to its complete height of 10 feet. Once the pillar is restored, then we take the glyphs or the fragments with glyphs and images on them that we found in the excavation, and then we reinsert them into the pillar. So we know each pillar has on it 3 hours of the 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night. So we know what's on the pillars. And we can reconstruct, we can restore this place, following the model that we have. That's the process. That's what we're doing. This is one column that's not even finished now. We're maybe 75% done with this. We now have to put the pieces of metal netcher back into this column, and then we go on to the next pillar. Finish that one, we go on to the next one. So each pillar is going to cost approximately $7,000 in materials and labor. Here is the area that we're working in. Here's the first pillared hall. Here's the second pillared hall. And there's a wall here that separates these two rooms. All of this is underground now. Here's ground level up here. Right? All of this is underground. And what I want you to notice is this wall right here. As we were excavating in this area this season, all of this was covered up with debris. As we now start removing this debris, the workers realized that this wall is unstable. The wall could fall down and injure folks. So they were saying, look, we have to tear the wall down. Wait a minute. There's metal netcher on both sides of the wall. We can't tear it down. So these workers, these Egyptian workers, are some very ingenious people. They came up with a wonderful idea, a wonderful way of preserving this wall. Here is a photograph that shows you the wall. It's difficult to see it in this photograph, but what they did was create gigantic staples out of steel rods. Bend the steel rod in the form of a staple, drill a hole. Here's a staple right here, here's a staple right here, and there's another one right here. So you create this staple that's 4 feet long. You drill a hole, you insert it into the wall, you put in cement to glue it into the wall to hold the pieces of the wall together so it doesn't fall down or kill or injure anybody. Wow. And you retain the metal netcher that's on this side of the wall, and a very important piece of metal netcher that we later discovered on this side of the wall. That's what we did. All this stuff costs money. You have to pay for the limestone, pay for the steel, pay for the cement, pay for all of this. And somebody's got to pay for it. White folk are not paying for it, so it meant that they had to come out of our pockets, and as we were raising money and the money was coming in short, most of the money came out of my pocket. So this is the process. This is the area where we're working in. And the landscape changes every week. As we remove more debris, and we've got to change the method of us coming down into the tomb, into the work site. So this is it in early July. And this is the process. We have workers down here in the tomb with sledgehammers busting up pieces of limestone. We have other workers with baskets taking the pieces of limestone up out of the tomb and dumping them in this pit. And then we have a truck come by, a dump truck comes by about once a month to take up all of this debris and haul it away from the site. So this is the active excavation site. And then as the excavation increased, we could no longer use the thin ramps to come down. We had to go to the supply place and buy these huge railroad ties. No, we didn't buy them because we didn't have the money to buy them. We rented them. We rented them. So that they came up with the support system. They constructed this ramp now so that we can walk in and out of this active excavation site, and so that they can bring down these limestone pieces that would allow us to reconstruct this pillar. This is what our dollars have paid for the last 2 years. Again, this is another shot of the first pillared hall and the second pillared hall where we're concentrating our efforts. An issue that I was confronted with this past summer was money's running short, and they're constantly saying, well, look, we need a new drill bit. This drill bit isn't working. We need this. We need that. And I'm like, So one of the things that we did at this site was acknowledge the fact that this tomb of Karakamoon, this priest, Karnak temple, had been desecrated by the Kemites shortly after he died, had been desecrated by the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs. One of the things that we decided to do was, the group of us who were there for the July mission, was that we needed to have a ritual at this site to honor the spirit of Karakamoon and to ask for his permission to be there to do this work to help restore his tomb. A group of us came out one evening, did this ritual, poured libation, and I personally appealed to the spirit of Karakamoon to let me know where we need to dig, because we don't have the money to dig everywhere. And we knew that his burial chamber was somewhere in this region. All this stone has to be busted up, has to be hauled out of the tomb. Do we dig here? Do we dig here? Do we dig? Where do we dig? Tell us where we dig. Karakamoon said, have them dig right here. I go to Dr. Lena, I said, Lena, why don't you take a couple of workers and have them work right in this area right here. Have them dig right here. Well, why? Dr. Lena, just trust me. Have them dig right there. So we had Mahmoud, who is the hardest working man in Egypt. Mahmoud and two of his partners bust up rocks and remove debris in this area. And then 2 days later, I hear Dr. Lena, Tony, come here. We found it. Found stairs going down into the earth. Yes. Yes. So this is early July. And I had to come back to the States to do a couple of presentations to prepare a group that I was bringing over in August. And I left, and Dr. Lena is emailing me and telling me of the progress as they're excavating in this area. They're finding all kinds of stuff, bones and stuff that the Rasul family had, and we kind of figured that the Rasul family had already robbed the tomb. But we didn't know what we would find. We didn't know what would be left over. And she called me one morning and said, Tony, we found a shaft. And we digging in the shaft. We found these bones in the shaft. Like, what the hell? We found these bones, and then the telephone cuts off. I'm like, what? So this is the process. We came back in August. Came back with my daughter and a group of people on a study tour. And by the time we came back, they had uncovered this entrance into the burial chamber. And this is Little Atlantis who wrote My First Trip to Africa. When she was 8. She's 28 now, 20 years ago. We go inside of this cave. Here she is crawling down over this limestone debris. And much of this debris was put there by a lot of the tomb robbers to cover their tracks. We made our way inside, crawling down, slowly but surely. Here's Dr. Lena coming in behind Atlantis. We get inside of this burial chamber. We find these caves off to the side. All of this is hollowed out of the limestone. And this area is 10 feet below the floor of the tomb. So we're now some 50 feet below ground level. And we find in this hollowed out space and then small caves carved out of limestone where some debris and bodies are, mummified bodies are. And then in the far end of this room, we see a shaft that extends down into the limestone rock another 28 feet.
Oh.
At the time we found the shaft, and we're pulling out the bones that they found in the shaft were bones of a water buffalo. So they took dead animals and dumped them into this shaft to plug up the shaft, to cover up their tracks. Shaft is 28 feet. We didn't have a 30-foot ladder. We had two 15-foot ladders. So we tied them together and used that to go down into the shaft. Here's Atlantis climbing down into the burial shaft. When we got down to the bottom of the shaft, we knew that this was a historic moment. And I told my daughter, baby, I want you to go in first. So you be the first African American in history to go inside of the burial chamber of Caracas. And here's his face. This space, this burial chamber, is about 12 feet wide, 18 feet deep. Floor to ceiling height is about 7 feet. What you notice here is filled with debris. This is debris left from the robbers, who filled it with debris in order to cover their track. They had already robbed the tomb, already found the mummy, opened the sarcophagus, broken up all the pieces, destroyed the mummy in their effort to get the gold and the jewelry and the other items which they sold. Wow. And we're there now to pick up the pieces. My daughter and I spent a week down in this burial chamber, going through and excavating the pieces. We've got all these plastic bags. We're putting pieces of mummy, pieces of bone, small pieces of jewelry that we're finding into these bags, photographing these objects. Spending, about 5 hours a day down in this space for a week. The ceiling has this wonderful image of Newt and carvings of astronomical figures in the heavens. All of this was to represent the journey of the soul of Caracas as he travels to the beautiful west. Newt, look at that face. Who is that? Who is that? All right? This is what National Geographic will never show you. This is what the Metropolitan Museum doesn't want you to see. This is why the Richard Pryor piece is so appropriate. Because there are people right now who don't want this information to come out. Why? Because it will change the course of history. This is the book of our lives. Right? Newt swallows the red disk of the sun, and it flows through her body, and she gives birth to it every morning. Here are the Neteru, the various constellations. This is the roadmap for the soul of Caracas to make his journey. Kushites doing everything in their power to guide the soul of the priest of Karnak Temple, priest of Amen at Karnak Temple. And then we find these 5-pointed stars. They say that people turn into stars when they die and live again in the midnight sky. 5-pointed stars. 5-pointed stars represent the people in the sky. Head, 2 arms, 2 legs. That's where the concept comes from. These are the ancestors in the heavens looking down on us, guiding us, protecting us, moving us forward, if we know who us is. Lena and Atlantis, and this is a son. This is the guy who came to my room in 2008 and said that his uncle wanted me to meet Dr. Lena. Now look at all this rubble. We didn't have, there was maybe 3 feet clearance between this rubble and the ceiling. Here's Atlantis sitting on a pile of rubble, holding an object in her hand.
Is that the actual depth of the tomb, 3 feet?
No, the actual height of the tomb is about 7 feet.
7 feet?
So we've got to remove all of this debris next season. This is where we're going to be concentrating our efforts next season, 2011. I want you to notice what she's holding in her hand. Let me zoom in, give you a larger view. You see what she's holding in her hand? It's a hand. And here's the thumb, the 4 fingers, and notice the size of the hand. That is the hand of what?
A child.
A child. So all of a sudden the whole dynamic changed. We found a child's hand there. So this could very possibly be a burial crypt of Karaka Moon, his wife, and their child. Which means that next season, hopefully we'll find enough material so that we can do a DNA analysis and match the DNA in the mummy of this child with the DNA of 2 adult skulls that we found. Or an adult jawbone that we found. Can you imagine the Rasul family finding this tomb, and in their quest to get access to the jewelry, they just tore these mummies apart.
Yeah.
Tore this tomb apart, the casket apart. Why would they do that? Because these are not their ancestors.
Right.
They had nothing to do with this culture, with these people.
Did they do anything to the Rasul family?
Please. Did they do anything to the bankers on Wall Street who bankrupted this nation? Here I am holding a mummified arm, a forearm. Still has the bandage over it. Still has the mummy wrapping on it.
How do you feel when you're in that space? I mean, like it's...
I felt honored. I felt honored to be there, and at a couple of points, crying.
Yep.
Special brother, man, the ancestors got the hand.
This is, I'm thinking this is what all of this has been for me to be here, and I'm thinking about the people who set things in motion. Going to Egypt with Dr. Ben, and then meeting Dr. Clark, and then meeting Asa Hilliard. All of the people who influenced me along my journey. All of this is coming together. And my friend Abu Naga, if he hadn't insisted that I come to Egypt to make that journey, I never would have met Dr. Lena.